How you guys doing?
Wonderful.
Great.
Amazing.
Looking good. Okay. Fuel Milwaukee, I am so glad to have you all here for today's Race Bridge conversation. Today we're talking about attracting and retaining diverse talent to Milwaukee. My name is Corey Jo Biddle. If you haven't met me, I'm the Executive Director of Fuel Milwaukee, and I am so happy to have all of you here today for today's conversation. Now, you might be wondering what this cool little transparent glass is behind me. I know, I love it just as much as you do. The rest of the room is much cooler, but I had to sit like this so you can see me. I have a view of the river. It's an amazing space. We're in Spaces. Many of you know that Fuel is a part of the Metro Milwaukee Association of Commerce, and MMAC is moving. We're moving to the Avenue, and our space is still being built out. So while we're in between spaces, we're here at Spaces. They've been so kind to allow us to use this amazing conference room. There's all kind of little cubbies, small office rooms, conference rooms, ducked off spots where you can have lunch. It's a beautiful space. If you haven't seen it, give them a call, check out the website. If you need someplace to work, this is a great option. So I'm gonna get going in the conversation here. I do not want to take a moment away from these amazing panelists in this topic of conversation today. I'm going to quickly introduce them and then give them an opportunity to talk a little bit more about the work they do, and then we'll get going right in the conversation. Before we do that, I want you all to get comfortable with the controls in the spaces. Let's start playing around in there. So go in the Q&A and play in there and go in the chat room. I want all of you that are online already right now to go in the chat room. Tell us what you're looking forward to hearing and learning in this conversation. Go in the chat right now. Let us know that you're here. What are you looking forward to? Why was this webinar something that you wanted to be a part of? Why did this topic interest you? Go ahead, start leaving those responses now, and I'll start introducing. We have Roselle Rogers, who's the Vice President of DE&I at Circa. Hey, Roselle. Yashika Gonzalez is in talent acquisition for Microsoft. Marquela Ellison, she got a lot of jobs, y'all. We're working her out here in Milwaukee. Marquela is the owner of Elastic Design. She does really beautiful graphic design. She's the president of Social X and the chairwoman of the City of Milwaukee's Millennial Task Force. Gus Martinez, now Gus and I had a conversation a couple weeks ago that really sparked the idea for this topic. We were on the phone talking about diversity and inclusion and recruiting and the special challenges that Milwaukee faces in recruiting, and it sparked what I think will be a really interesting conversation for us all today. So Gus, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of tag each of you and have you all say a little bit about your work. Tell us a little bit about the work that you do. How does it relate to D&I, attraction, diversity? Where do you fit in this world, and why are you so passionate about this? We'll start with Roselle.
Good afternoon, everybody. So I work as a VP for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at Circa, but I also lead our thought leadership efforts at Circa. We help over 5,000 companies nationwide with respect to their affirmative action compliance as well as their diversity recruiting efforts. So I also work with a network of about 15,000 community organizations who represent minorities, women, veterans, and individuals with disabilities, and our work connects all the forward-thinking companies who want to recruit diverse talent with those organizations. So very passionate about D&I. I'm a minority myself, so this is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I'm a Milwaukee transplant as well, so I do have very good things to say about Milwaukee. So this is something that's very timely and would love to contribute to the conversation on how we can continue to bring about diverse talent to Milwaukee and help them stay.
Thank you so much. How about Yashika?
Hi, I currently work in talent acquisition for Microsoft, and I've had the wonderful privilege of actually working for quite a few Fortune 100 companies because I did contracting for about 6 years. So in that, it's given me a unique perspective of, I guess, the geographical landscape of where corporate professionals, people of color are, and then what employers are looking for when they are trying to attract and retain talent. So I believe that Microsoft's diversity initiatives, out of all the ones I've been a part of, is very inclusive. It's very well thought out, and I believe I can share some of that within this talk, as well as how to maneuver through as a candidate to get into some of these corporations and make yourself seen. So that's what I want to contribute.
Awesome. How about you, Marquela?
Hi, yeah, I'm president of SocialX Milwaukee. We are a young professional consulting group here in Milwaukee, celebrating 8 years now. And so we are focused on remedying the brain drain here in Milwaukee, finding ways for people to fall in love with Milwaukee, be immersed in Milwaukee. So a big part of our group are people who are not originally from Milwaukee, transplants. How can we keep them there? How can we introduce them to the city? And especially people of color. Where can you go to get a drink? Where can you go to get your hair done? Where can you go to be around people like you? So filling in that gap. And then I serve right now as the chairwoman for the Millennial Task Force, which was formed in the beginning of the year. There's 16 of us, and the task force is just set on finding ways and providing recommendations on how can we retain millennials and how can we attract more millennials to Milwaukee.
Perfect. Last but not least, Gus.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Excited to be on the panel. A little bit about my background. In my previous role, I worked for Visit Milwaukee. And that's an interesting role because with Visit Milwaukee, it's the face and marketing arms for the city of Milwaukee, right? So in the tourism sector. So when you think about it, you think about the brand of Milwaukee. And on my role there previously, I was their sales manager handling the multicultural market. So I had the really privileged and unique role of working with groups and bringing in their conventions into Milwaukee. So some of the groups I were able to land and secure were groups like NABA, which is National Association of Black Accountants, LULAC, National Society of Black Engineers, Alpha Kappa Alpha. So, you know, when I'm pitching those companies and those organizations, you know, it's what's the story of Milwaukee, right? And I had a great time selling that story of Milwaukee, the diversity, the growth of Milwaukee. Now, as I pivot to my new career, I've actually have started a brand new company, and it's a GSM Consulting, which is a diversity consulting company. And what I do there is I look to work with organizations and companies to work on their diversity initiatives. You know, what does that platform look like? What is the 5 to 10 year window look like? What is their diversity retention look like? What does their recruitment look like? And just really become a subject matter expert in the diversity field. And similar to like Roselle, I'm also a transplant. I'm actually born and raised in Chicago. Yes, that means I'm a Bears fan. But I moved here 6 years ago. And the biggest compliment I can give the city is originally when I moved here to work for Visit Milwaukee, I gave myself a 2-year window. So come here for 2 years, and it was a stepping stone, go on to something else. Yeah, I've been here 6 years now. And it's because I've fallen in love with the city, everything it has to offer. I've seen it grow in just my 6 years here. So excited on where Milwaukee can go and will go.
So we have 2 transplants and 3 people. Sheikah, were you born in Milwaukee? I know you moved a while ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
I was born in Chicago, but I was only there as a baby. I grew up majority of the time in Milwaukee.
yeah, same here. Quayla, are you a native? Yeah. Born and raised. Quayla, I'll ask you, what has kept you in Milwaukee?
I definitely business. It's kept me in Milwaukee as a small business owner. Being here, being born here, the connections, the 1.5 degrees of separation is great for business. So I've always said, as long as I can make enough money to travel as needed. I love my city. So that is the main reason I'm here, the opportunities that it is affording my business.
Gus, you fell in love with Milwaukee in the 6 years you've been here. What's made you fall in love with it?
So I have a, again, unique perspective. So I also worked in DC as well. So I worked in Chicago and DC, so two big cities here. You know, I have to say it's the people. The people here are very authentic, are kind, are caring. I have a little funny story. When I first moved here, I was going on a run, and in Chicago, when you go out running in the streets, you kind of play Frogger with the cars. And I vividly remember at a cross street, and cars are allowing me to walk, which kind of threw me off. Equally though, you know, the really cool thing is when you go to your local bars, your restaurants, people actually know you by your first name, right? And you know, you other cities like the Chicagos and the DCs of the world, it's very transactional. It's what do you need, what do you want, and you know, it's not like that in Milwaukee. People actually care about you, and you know, I've loved that from day one. I've noticed that from day one. And it's funny, my clients, when I brought them to Milwaukee, were able to see that as well, and just like how kind the city is.
That's awesome. Okay, there's a comment I just want to, that just came in the chat. Let's speak a little bit more slowly to accommodate those with hearing loss. The replay is going to have captions, just so you know, but let's just be a little conscious. Thank you for sharing that comment there in the chat. So as we move into the discussion, I just want to, so as Gus and I were sort of discussing the region of MMAC's Region of Choice Pledge, and I'll show this slide here. So MMAC has started a new initiative. We're probably about a year into it now, where we have over 100, there's about 110 companies now that have signed this pledge, where they are committed to increasing the number of Black and Brown managers in their organizations and Black and Brown people at large. So sort of what brought all of this about is just the consistent messaging and concerns from our board members about diversity, segregation, you know, racial inequity, and how it's impacting their ability to attract and retain their talent. We focused in on one of the areas that we focused in on was management. So I'll explain what we're looking at here a little bit. The reason why we're looking to focus on increasing the numbers of managers, right? So 12% of all employees are managers, okay? 88% of that 12% are white managers. 4.7% of the total management pool are African American managers. But African Americans make up 14% of the workers. For Hispanics and Latino, only 3.4% of them are managers, despite 8% of them being a part of the total employment numbers. So, I mean, there's a report, and I'll put the link to it so you all can see, but there's stat after stat after stat. There was research that was already out there. We did our own research. So one of our concerns, or one of our focuses, was in the management portion. So Roselle, can you level set for us what diversity in the workplace means? Ideally, should those management numbers, should those employment numbers match a certain number of, like, should it match with what's in the population? What is, does diversity, does that goal look different across organizations? Is there an ideal number? Is there a, you know, how do organizations guide whether or not they're doing a good job with diversity?
This is a very timely question, especially in the light of what's going on right now. And Yashika, you probably are aware of that the Department of Labor sent a letter to Microsoft and Wells Fargo inquiring into their diversity goals and what's the basis of those diversity goals, right? So I'll try to come up with a more balanced answer here. So when we're shooting for diversity, we set certain goals in terms of what is our beginning state and where do we want to end, right? And that can occur across different job groups. So management versus non-management positions, professional and technical positions. And these are typically set based on availability. So take a look at your statistical area. What's your labor market? What does it look like? How many software developer software developer in this particular population or demographic group are available in your recruitment area. Now that can exponentially expand depending on what your recruitment area is. Are you just recruiting locally or are you recruiting across the nation, right? So for that, we refer to the US Census statistics for us to be able to know what's the available population that you can recruit from. And from there, the goal is to try to reflect what is in your recruitment area. You want to at least be able to achieve something equivalent to or equal to what's available in your recruitment area for you to be able to say, are we doing a good job or are we not doing a good job? Is there still more room for improvement and for growth? So that's the basis for the goal setting, and that's the best practice. And you don't want to just arbitrarily set certain goals, especially when you're tying them to compensation, as far as incentivizing your managers and your recruitment team in achieving your diversity goals. The Department of Labor has repeatedly said that you need to tie them to what's available in the area and don't just set arbitrary goals, because now you might be crossing over into setting quotas, which are illegal, right? So quotas are illegal because now you're setting a specific arbitrary number saying that we want to achieve X amount or 25% of 25% diversity in a certain demographic group for this particular job group when the availability is only 15% or 10%.
Mm-hmm. When the availability is like that, you know, and it was the case with Milwaukee too. So there are a lot of the different reports that we put out and the research is around pipeline. Mm-hmm. So the development of current talent and education especially, which some of those goals are a little further out. So the stopgap, right, is, I would think, is recruiting. Yashika, is that one of the solutions when the talent isn't nearby or isn't already in the organization, that you're looking to recruit for that diversity? Yeah. And is that a challenge for companies, especially in a place like Milwaukee?
I believe so. I think that there's two things. Pipelining is very important, right? A lot of times, even in the Seattle area, we find ourselves having to come out of our backyard to find diverse talent because that's not our main demographic. I think we're like at 4%, right? So but with that, we have buy-in from our government officials and also the major corporations like Amazon and Google that are here have made the same commitment. So I think that it is definitely something that's a broad initiative that needs multi-prongs. The other thing, and that's a huge investment, right? And the reason why I say government, city government, because they have an opportunity to help change the narrative. I think branding is a huge part of this. How does the media cover your city, right? What are the resources for research into Milwaukee? What do they see? A lot of people make that decision based on that, right? So I think that's one piece of it. The other piece is they have to be willing to invest. So if you have disparities in your pay, if you have pay inequities, if you have all these things need to be examined, especially when you're moving talent and want to attract talent from the outside, which to me is part of diversity, right? Part of it is going to be your local talent, but bringing unique perspectives from outside of Milwaukee is going to help Milwaukee. So I hope I answered that question. But we had to invest a lot. Relocation is a huge part of our package. You know, that it costs about, I don't want to give away the numbers, but they relocated me here and it was a pretty penny. That's a huge investment. And a lot of companies are not necessarily willing to make that, especially if they're not really vested in diversity.
So it's so much bigger than just a recruiter. I think some people think that a recruiter just gets on LinkedIn and
we do. Hey. I mean, shout out to LinkedIn, another Microsoft product. But yeah, I mean, recruiters do, but yeah, there's so many layers to this where we have to work it from the beginning to end. And even that part where you mentioned about management. That is so important. That is one of the draws that a lot of people, especially people of color, that look for, because they look for opportunities of advancement. If you don't have managers that look like them, that's an indication of a glass ceiling, right? So I think that that's one thing. And I think that Roselle made a really, really good point, like as far as how we come up with our diversity initiatives. The other part of it is the products, right? So we like to find people that represent a diversity in thoughts and ideas, because our products go above and beyond just one demographic. And every company that I've worked for had a product base. And so we look for definitely not necessarily people who have a certain education background or fit a certain profile. Okay, we look for people who have an interest in, this, whatever the job is, and we hire to potential as well. That's another way to kind of diversify.
Roselle, when you're working with organizations, do you get a sense that many companies have sort of a well-rounded program around recruiting, or are they hoping that you're going to, just send these same applications and these same links to a more diverse pool and it'll work out? It seems like it's more involved than that.
It is. There's a common notion that diversity or a diversity and equity program is just all front-end recruiting, which is not. For you to really be successful in your attempt to achieve and diversify your workforce, you need to look at it more comprehensively. Because if you only focus on the front-end recruiting part of it and not focus on the selection process, and also focus on building a more inclusive culture in your organization, you're going to fail. Because all you're going to do is just spin your wheels and do a lot of front-end work, bringing them into your organization only to have them leave. So I like to address it in three parts. There's the front-end recruiting, and then there's the selection process. Maybe your problem is not in outreach. Maybe your problem is not in bringing applicants to your door, because maybe they're already there. You have a lot of diverse applicants coming and applying, and they're right at your doorstep. They're just not making it through the selection process. And you need to ask why. And that is a question that is more of, is it really more of a question of outreach, or is it more of a question of selection? Is there something wrong in your selection and hiring process that is making diverse applicants fall off somewhere during the process in larger numbers and disproportionately compared to non-minority applicants, right? So we like to suggest that companies undertake a step analysis, which is essentially taking a look at all of the stages in your hiring process, beginning from sourcing to the resume screen, to the phone screen, interview, in-person interviews and panel interviews, assessments, etc. And then take a look at your numbers. How are diverse applicants progressing through that process? And then are there certain stages where they fall off disproportionately in larger numbers compared to other non-minority or non-diverse applicants? And then take a look at what's happening there. And likely what you'll find is there are certain steps in the process, or questions being asked, or requirements being called for during the process that have a disparate impact on minority candidates or on diverse applicants. And that's something that you'll need to fix to make sure that your hiring and selection process is a little bit more, is fair to all demographic groups. And it doesn't result in disparate impact against a certain population, especially your protected classes. And then once they make it through and you hire them, right? There's a lot of things that companies can do to make sure they do a successful onboarding, and you really make them feel like they belong in your organization. And now we're going into building an inclusive culture, and that touches on policies, practices, and procedures, right? So is everything within your organization running and consistently with your diversity goals, with your goal to make your company more inclusive and to not really factor in race or gender when it comes to promotion or when it comes to compensation. So you need to examine all of that for you to be able to be successful in the entirety of your effort and be able to retain them within your organization and allow them to be able to grow and advance and get promoted into higher level positions. And that's what will make a difference in your diversity efforts. If you're looking at it in a more comprehensive, as a more comprehensive process that way. Mm-hmm. And I also want always underscore that a diversity initiative is not really a program because it goes through and permeates through your entire organization. It needs to flow through all of your functional areas. So it's not just something that is run from an HR department or your talent acquisition department, because it will go through your marketing, it will flow through your business operations, it will flow through human resources, it will flow through all aspects of your organization. So it really is a lot bigger and it goes beyond talent acquisition and recruiting advertising.
If I could chime in real quickly on that, I think it's important to note the importance and the value of high potential, but also of mentorship. So I think one of the challenges I see often in the recruiting HR world is that you have a person of color who just doesn't have all the criteria on the resume, right? So that they're overlooked. So I think it's important, and I would challenge HR recruiters to hire on character and high potential, and then you include the mentorship. So have a person who can mentor that person of color to be able to bridge those shortfalls or those shortcomings, right? Because I think that's a great way to bring in and diversify your labor force. And also, I definitely want to share this little nugget as well. Being a millennial here, is that that 67% of millennials look at a company's diversity and also their initiatives when they are examining, that company, and they're examining their offer letter as well. And as of 2019, millennials made up 50% of the U.S. labor force, and that number is going to jump to 75% come 2025. So you can't overlook the millennial market.
There was a comment from Lucia.
Oh, can I also add to what Gus just said? Not only are millennials the biggest population in our labor force now, they are also the most diverse.
Absolutely.
They happen to be the most diverse. So you really cannot ignore that. The labor market is changing, right? So if they are already the most diverse and they're the largest population of your workforce, just think about it. 5 years from now, are we going to be less diverse or are we going to be more diverse? This is the least diverse we will ever be as far as the labor market is concerned.
More and more diverse. Lucia made a comment in the chat about the distinction between mentorship and sponsorship. And I saw this in preceding this conversation. We had a conversation on my Facebook page about this, and there were a lot of people frustrated and feeling like, I feel like I always have to have some kind of inside track into the companies that I'm applying for. I don't necessarily know decision makers that can just kind of, pull me in and have me meeting with the right people. There's this idea that there isn't as much sponsorship or vouching for people of color in organizations, and they got to go all the way through the process. And if they, don't cross a T or dot an I, they get kicked out. What's your response to that? Have you seen that? Does it resonate? It's been my experience. Every position I've ever had, I really had a relationship at the place. I don't think I've ever submitted a cold application that resulted in a job, to be honest.
Right. Same here.
Okay.
I think that's what part of the issue is. And I think that it's so important that Milwaukee invest in career development. I mean, career development programs that are less than surface level, right? And I attended some of them, and I knew how to write my resume. I knew how to have a certain business acumen, and I knew how to get into an application system. But the truth is, when we look for people, there's a couple of advantages besides knowing people. If you don't know people, you can network. A lot of people in positions of power and position, they are looking for people to sponsor. They are looking for people to give back to. So you could put yourself out there like that. But I applied to Microsoft for like 5 years, right? And they called me because I branded myself. So they're not looking for people who want to be something. You have to become that. So I was doing panels like this. I was working within disadvantaged communities and teaching them about, how to work for this company and how to do this. And so it was because I was doing that and I was advertising that and I branded myself in a certain way, they found me. So outside of networking and knowing somebody, branding yourself is very important.
Quayla, I did a little experiment before we got on, and I Googled being Black in Milwaukee, and then I Googled Black professional in Milwaukee, and I got two very different responses. So when I Googled being Black in Milwaukee, I'm going to show you guys what it looks like. Many of you have done this and seen it. So if you're looking at a job opportunity, recruiter calls you, emails you, the first thing you do, right? If you're a person of color, I chose Black because this is my experience. This is, you Google, what is it like to be Black in the city, right? And all of these different articles came up. I mean, just look at that. Why is Milwaukee so bad for Black people? Worst cities for African American, racial challenges. I mean, the Black community is being affluent and Black and still trapped by segregation. I mean, that's overwhelming. Then, Quayla, I Googled Black professionals in Milwaukee, and I started to see all of these different events that you and I have done in other organizations that are similar to ours, stories about those events. It just feels a little bit organizations that support the populations that we're looking at, the most influential Black. It's a completely different picture. And I wanted to show that because I want us to talk a little bit about the challenges of our branding and what we can do to change the narrative. And a lot of your work has been around changing the narrative. Can you talk about that a little bit? You're on mute. I know I still do that too.
Apologies. Trying to block out my dog just in case he gets started.
It's okay. We understand. Babies, dogs, all welcome.
So yeah, it's changing the narrative here in Milwaukee for professionals of color in general it's tough. I feel like most people who are born and raised from Milwaukee, like me, have a easier time telling that story and pitching it. One big thing, and I feel like hopefully I'm all over the place when I answer this. A big thing as a graphic designer and somebody who's in marketing, one of the biggest ways that we can change the narrative is like owning and controlling the narrative. So when you go back to that tab, Milwaukee Neighborhood News Services, we work a lot with TMJ4, but I make sure we like capture our stories, documents it well, and make sure that people are sharing them. Make sure we're tagging people. So as much as that the first tab you searched, that happens to happen and gets highlighted, and people who aren't from Milwaukee, it's easier for that to get to them versus some of the stuff that SocialX does. So that's just one thing I'm always pushing at every event that I go to, is that, not most people are not going to come up to you and ask you what's good in the neighborhood. You have to go and tell them what's good. So I'm just always putting that charge out there for everybody to really take advantage of what you do and making sure that it's highlighted. So I have working relationships with different media partners where I make sure to share the right stories with them. And then, of course, in a bigger scheme, especially with right now with the Black Lives Matter movement and everything going on in Milwaukee, I've got on a few Zoom calls and people ask, "Are you okay? I know you're in Milwaukee." And it's embarrassing. It really is. How do you tackle all that? How do you get people to come to Milwaukee? SocialX does a really great job at that. Of course, right now, during the pandemic, we're not able to be person to person. But the government in general needs to do better at telling stories. We need to have a brand, a coalition amongst just Milwaukee residents in general about how we talk about ourselves. Even certain outlets, I feel like some of them tell certain stories more than others. How do we create that balance? How do we call them out? How do we correct those stories? Because it is easy to look up things and create a story. You know, you can look up, what did we have, lions in Milwaukee before? A lion in Milwaukee before. But I just think we have a lot of things that we battle here, and a lot of our issues get highlighted way more than the successes. And so Social X, you know, we do a lot of great work, but we're a small group. But Feel Milwaukee is doing great work. Bunch of professionals, other young professional groups in the city are doing the work to put us there. I also thought it was interesting. Social X, we do an annual event called Homecoming Week every year. And I've realized a lot of people are not comfortable using the word professional. And you see that difference when you search it too. You know, it says Black in Milwaukee, Black professionals. That not everybody owns that professional word as much as they should. Not saying that they are or they aren't, but that's just not the word that they use. So I think there's some things that have to change in language. There have been events. Our events are for professionals of color, but some people are not searching that keyword all the time. How do we make people more confident that they are a professional? Or how do we change, you know, what does it mean to be Black in Milwaukee, who you are, what value you have? I hope I answered that.
Yeah, you did. And you know what, Fuel used to be called Young Professionals of Milwaukee when we started. And part of the reason why we changed the name is that we found that the name was more of a barrier for some people. Like there were teachers that thought if they didn't, educators that thinking if I don't wear a suit and a tie, that means I'm not professional. So we've seen that a lot of that language has been a barrier. Gus, I know we're kind of in your wheelhouse right now talking about.
It is, yeah, tourism, yeah, so I definitely have that lens. Unfortunately, I feel that bad news sells, right? And definitely agree, you know, we need to change the narrative. But a few nuggets that, you know, that I know and that we know that we need to push out more is that, number one, that Milwaukee is a minority majority city. You know, so when you're walking down the street of Milwaukee, there's a lot of people that look like us, you know, so it's 39% African American, it's 18% Latino. So that's a great story of itself, right? Because I've been to other cities like a Cincinnati where I'm walking down the street and it kind of feels like a reverse zoo where people are looking at me and just like, where are you from, right? And it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. Equally too, that we are a LGBT friendly city. So back in 2018, the Human Rights Campaign, what they do is they go to each city and they determine what is the climate as far as how are the laws being made there, how safe is it there for LGBT. And in 2018, Milwaukee scored a perfect 100. And when you think of an LGBT friendly city, you think of a Miami. Miami scored a 78. And that story just isn't talked about, right? And then last but not least, I mean, the big feather in our cap is that, you know, we won the Democratic National Convention. There was a reason why the DNC chose Milwaukee over big cities like Miami, over big cities like Houston, right? So those are just three nuggets that we need to be able to push out more and share with people. So instead of they want to talk about like the negative, it's just like, no, look at these three positive things right off the bat that you need to look at Milwaukee.
But I think too, just to add on to what you say, it's very important when you're a recruiter to keep it 100 because that goes to retention. You definitely should paint a positive picture, but you should prepare people, right, for some of the challenges because you'd be surprised how many people are passionate ambassadors for change. So if you do have candidates that maybe be a great candidate in terms of a job and a skill level from a culture fit, you got to take a look at that. I myself left Milwaukee just to attain a certain level of skills. If there was a position, a leadership position, probably a C-level position, I would transition back. So it's just a question of finding the right fit, right? And that would be something because of my passion and connection to the city that I would want to contribute as an external, right? But I believe that a lot of times with retention, we don't prepare people for that. We paint this rosy picture, and which is true, but make sure that there's a balance of both.
And I used to go to one of our fuel members where they headquartered out in Waukesha, and they would recruit people in, and folks would live out there because that was the space that they were used to. So they would, get a house or an apartment back there and be like, wait a minute, where's all this diversity y'all were talking about? So a lot of the reason why Fuel started was because of that. So people would have a reason to come into different parts of the city, and we're sort of like a guide for them beyond what they see, in that the area around where they work. So I'll open this up to everybody. So let's say candidates get through to the point of having a conversation. Maybe they're going to be hired. You're going back and forth, right? They Google Milwaukee and these issues come up and they want to have a conversation about it. If you can overcome all of that, once they accept the job and they're going to come to Milwaukee, any people of color, what elements need to be in place for them to have a good experience here? What kind of transition can employers in the community allow for to help people just really ease in and get into the groove of what it is to be a Milwaukeean? Quayla, I saw you unmute. I'll start with you, and then just anybody that wants to jump in, let's just talk about that.
Yeah, again, SocialX, we work with different corporations and we help fill in some of those blanks. Being born and raised in Milwaukee, I can't imagine what that's like to come here and, to not know anybody and try to navigate the city. It's one thing to have a great job and have great pay, but usually within a year or two, transplants will usually leave. They haven't fallen in love. They don't feel connected. They don't have friends. They don't have a place to go and let their hair down in a safe environment around people like them. So SocialX, we have worked with Direct Supply, worked with Associated Bank, a few other organizations where they bring us in as a member. They become a member of our organization, and we're able to give them some of the tools and things that we use to kind of connect them to Milwaukee and to the city. Somebody may put in the comments, I think Tariq was saying that, it's 40% African-American right now. The events and stuff that we do, it brings that part of Milwaukee together. And it's sometimes hard to find. If you're working a 9-to-5 and you're not from here, you go get something to eat, it's quick for you to just go in and out of the house. You're looking for a place that you can belong. So I think that corporations and businesses in general need to connect with smaller organizations that can kind of help remedy some of the things that they're not able to do. So becoming a member of different organizations, encouraging them to go out and try new things, making sure that there are partnerships and connections into the city that'll make them feel like home.
Yeah, a big part of the reason why a lot of folks stay here, I know for myself, is my connections. There are some challenges, but definitely having a strong network and a friend group has a professional network and a friend group has really helped me feel more at home, even though I'm a native. Every day I feel like I'm getting more and more comfortable. I'm just showing one of the links from SocialX's web pages where there's so many pictures of the different kinds of events, and you see the diversity. They target people of color, but there's all kinds of people that come to SocialX events. And so I'll post this link so you guys can check out the organization. Let's keep the conversation going. What should organizations, what can we as a community do? Not just the folks that come here as transplants, what about the people who are already here and feeling like they don't have a community and that support around?
I think we need to look at internal cultures too, internal organizations. We have ERGs. I don't know if that's real big there, employee resource groups. Mm-hmm. I believe people come for a job, but they stay for the relationships. So we have a Pride group, we have a women's resource group, we have BAM, which is Blacks at Microsoft. And these groups are very strong to where they kind of spill over into like external relationships. But I found that most companies don't invest in the onboarding process. They may go through training of someone and then they leave it there. And I think that it should be maybe a year-long experience that they're looking at, and they're strategizing how to make this person not only understand their job, but feel welcome within the culture. I don't think we invest enough in that.
I would have to agree with that. I want to introduce the concept of belonging, because studies show that belonging is more important to people when it comes to retention, and it is one of their needs when it comes to employment. So if people don't feel like they belong in an organization, they will leave. And some would choose to stay if they feel like they belong and choose to forego higher compensation or a better opportunity elsewhere if they like where they are, if they feel like they really have strong ties to that company and have built enough and sufficient relationships within that organization. And Mshika is very correct in saying companies don't spend enough or put enough effort in onboarding. I think we need to really take a look at how do we socialize our people once they're inside our organization, within the organization and also in the community outside of that organization. How do we connect them, especially if they're a transplant and we recruited them successfully to move to Milwaukee? How do we now help them establish those roots? And those roots will only grow as deep as the factors surrounding that person, right? So it is how you make them feel like they belong. That is how you grow deeper roots in a society. So I think we need to take a look at external, outside of the organization, as well as internal. And ERGs, or the diversity councils that organizations form around the diverse populations, would help with that. And you could even leverage your ERGs or your diversity council with onboarding, because they can help you then build those connections before they even come on board. They can start communicating with that person, introduce themselves. If I'm Latina and we're onboarding a Latina employee, I can make that connection right away, and I can introduce that person to all the different ethnic events and activities and resources in Milwaukee. So if we think of it that way, let's try to see how we can make that experience one or two notches better, right? So that they feel like they belong and they're building connections right away. So you pair them with a buddy, you pair them with your ERG, you give them mentorship, but also help them in socializing within the organization, and make sure that they get through not just their 90 days, but even further beyond, so that then on they can start doing that independently on their own without your guidance. So that's one of the things that I think we lack. And I'm glad to see that we have organizations like SocialX, but I'd also want to see organizations or companies forming networks together where we do things for because it doesn't have to be a single company's own effort, right? Why don't we combine our efforts together and say, hey, why don't we do this for all of our, provide these types of opportunities for all of our new employees, or even existing employees, or diverse employees, and have those groups be formed and host events that are beneficial to all companies in Milwaukee. I think we could use something like that.
Yeah,
I have a question.
I think there's a African American leadership. There's a network of different ERGs. I think there's like 20 of them now. I know Jasmine, if you know Jasmine Johnson, or can look her up on LinkedIn, she can tell you more about it. They've already kind of started that work, and I think they're having great success, but we can see even more that work happening more across organizations in partnership with all the groups that are already, sort of doing this work. So we have my colleague Marjorie Yoshida is in the chat right now. So we got 10 minutes left, and yeah, drop your resources in the chat. If you can think of any links or resources, put them in the chat, and then we'll share the chat afterwards. If you can't capture the URLs and the websites right now, don't worry about it. We'll share them with you afterwards. Marjorie, do you see anything in in the chat any questions that you want to pose to the panelists.
I have a question too.
Okay.
Do you want to go with this other question, or?
Let's Yashika, you go first, and then we'll go with Marjorie.
Well, I have a question. Being a little bit removed from the city, one thing that I've noticed among people of color is imposter syndrome. So we talked about belonging, right? I wanted to know from the panelists, what do you think drives that? Does everybody know what imposter syndrome is? It's when you're in a position and you don't feel like you're worthy of it. You don't feel like you have anxiety constantly about whether or not you can perform. And it's almost a self-esteem thing, but when I see it a lot with people of color. So I'm wondering where it comes from and what types of things we can do as an organization to combat or to support that.
And like to be aware that it's happening, right?
Yeah, that part too.
Not something that people would talk about.
Yeah.
It really
I think
is.
if I can chime in on that, I feel, I've seen that and noticed that as well. And I think the issue with that, or the challenge, is it comes to representation, right? So I feel too often in the Black and Brown community, it's the mentality of, I have my seat at the table. I'm not going to give that up, right? And I think in white America, what they do well is they invite others to that table, right? So it's the sense of, I'd rather be invited to the table than be dinner, if that makes sense, right? So I think there's a lot of power in representation, and I recently discovered when I was doing a little research on Fortune 500 companies, which kind of just blew my mind. As of August of 2020, of the Fortune 500 CEOs, there are 3 African Americans, there's 10 Asian, 10 Hispanic, and 3 other. So we have 26 of 500 seats of CEOs that are person of color. That's 5%, right? So can you expect someone to, do more if they've never seen someone like themselves in those high positions, right? So I think that's the challenge, is the representation and the lack of people of color in leadership.
Agreed.
Anybody? That's a good one. That was a good question.
I want to know from Quayla, like, do you, in providing these resources, is that something, and like I said, I'm looking for maybe solutions too, how in our development training, how we can maybe combat that.
That's a great point. It's something new that I just kind of researched over the last 2 months. So it's interesting to bring that up. I feel sometimes I deal with imposter syndrome, and even what I was saying before about people not confidently seeing themselves as a professional. I think there's a lot of work that has to be done. We've done career fairs and things like that, and like you said, people come, they fill out the application, and then they're denied. But like, why? Are there any tools any resources that can help get them ready if they want to apply again? So again, it's representation, like I said. Something that is kind of newly identified, so I don't have like a true answer for it, but there is some hesitancy. The same things that people come to our wind downs and different events for, the things that we talk about are the things that we hesitate about. I even have friends come to some social X events and I'm like, is this good for me? Do I belong, here? Because you're not used to having something like that. So yeah, no, I definitely think there's some work that needs to be done. I don't know what that is, but it's an esteem thing. And I think, like I said, I think the biggest thing is representation that makes it better.
Yeah, I think there's a culture around you. Gus talked about it a little bit. A lot of our leadership is taking the roles that are stretch roles, right? So when you start to advance, you're taking a chance. You're doing something that you've never done before. But for a lot of people of color, you don't want to make a mistake. So it creates this feeling that you're just sort of where you are and you're never good enough and you're never prepared enough to move on. I need more education. And sometimes it's like, you just gotta, take the risk. But that goes back to Lucia's comment about sponsorship and having a community around you that says, it's okay for you to make this mistake. It's okay for you to take this shot. And a lot of times you don't feel that safety net, so yeah. I think there's a lot of that is psychological, just because you just are constantly knowing,
Yeah.
make a mistake. You know, women do it too, more than men. So it has a lot to do with oppression in our culture, and I think that's such a good question. So okay, we're like 4 minutes out, so we're probably going to go about 10 minutes over, if that's okay with the panelists. If you can't, I understand if you have to hop off at 3, but I can tell, because I know Marjorie got a list of questions. I can tell we might go over a little bit. If you have to hop off as a participant, we understand. As a panelist, we understand. But we'll go over just a little bit. Marquela, go ahead.
I was going to touch back on what Yashika was saying before. I hesitated to bring it up. Somebody was saying, you know, mentor, we need to go a step past mentorship for sure. I don't know if you need to be mentored by somebody in your company, but I do think every professional of color needs a mentor to help kind of scope them along the way for things like imposter syndrome. I'm 31, but you know, I'm a mentor. I still consider myself kind of young, and that's intimidating to be a mentor. But I find myself speaking to people younger than me and always telling them to be more aggressive. My advice is always, so what, do it anyways, things like that. And I think a lot of the places and rooms that I've been in is because of unofficial mentorships or clients or connections that I made with people who look like me, who help push me forward. So I just think that that's always helpful. I think that's something that everybody always wants. And I think it's even though some people may be busy or high up, they're willing to do it. It's just more so about asking and finding the right person that is a good fit for you. So just want to put that out there too, especially because we're in this digital world, we're at home more, to make sure you find a mentor, somebody you can bounce your ideas and frustrations off.
I think too, for me, I'm used to like coming from a corporate culture where you had to talk a certain way, you had to walk a certain way, like for you to be a non-threatening woman or a non-threatening Black person that they feel comfortable, people feel comfortable being around. And so one thing I love about Microsoft is like in one of my first meetings, like the VP of HR like dropped this F-bomb, and it immediately put me at ease because they take, you know, being your authentic self very seriously. So, you know, I may crip walk one day to my office. You never know. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's okay. And I think that that's a huge part in trying to find a culture fit. And you have to find probably more mature organizations that are further along in that. But that's not always an option, right? So be the change you want to see. Right. So covering is a huge issue that we found in our bias training that we do, where we feel like we have to cover who we are. But I have on my Facebook page, I got VPs and HR folk, and it be lit. I say whatever I want to say, but I couldn't always do that. Right. So I think that also is important in terms of like being your authentic self and people appreciating that.
That makes me think about what can we as an organization then encourage that for our employees to be able to bring 100% of themselves to work and not have to check in certain parts of themselves and hide that when they walk into your organization, right? So how can we have them bring their full selves at work? If we say that their diversity contributes to our organization, why are we having them carve out parts of their self, right? Yeah. So you either are really believing in full diversity or not, and then making it possible for them to be their authentic self so that they can contribute fully to your organization, and your organization can reap the benefit from that, right? So I think we as organizations need to start thinking about what kind of climate are we creating in our organization to help, to encourage that, to encourage them to bring 100% of themselves, right? And that will touch on culture again. That will touch on your policies, your practices, and your procedures. What is it that you're doing in your practices that is discouraging that? And then try to do a self-examination. And so I would encourage employers to do a climate assessment and survey your employees. Do they feel comfortable bringing 100% of themselves to work? What kind of suggestions do you think might they have in terms of practices happening or occurring in the organization that you need to stop or that you need to introduce in the organization to encourage that.
Now I'm 40, right? So I'm not a spring chicken, and I've worked for a lot of corporations. So I'm like over it. I'm at that point, right? So I sat down with my manager and I was frank. I said, I don't trust white people. Like, I just told him. I said, because he's like, I want you to participate more, and why don't you do this? I said, I gotta see the landscape. I gotta see who's cool, who going rat on me, who out to get me. When you are recognized and you stand out, that's a whole nother set of enemies that you could potentially have. So I got to kind of chill and see that. But that was to my detriment. He let me know that. He thanked me for the transparency. But that was to my detriment, because then they're not able to see me and see what I can contribute, which is what we're measured on. So I think having those types of difficult conversations and just putting it out on the table, be bold enough to do that. And if you got to be a disruptor, be a disruptor.
And if I can make 2 quick points, I think it's important for white culture and white America to stretch their comfort zone. I know oftentimes we talk about, let's get comfortable being uncomfortable. That's a big step, but I think the challenge is, how do you stretch your comfort zone? And another really good practice is reverse mentorship, reverse sponsorship. So too often it's an employee, being mentored, sponsored by the manager director. But if we reverse it, we're able to get a manager director to be sponsored by someone, an employee, a person of color, a woman. And I think that's very helpful too, because as we just talked about the CEOs of corporate America, what usually is a CEO is a white man, right? So a white male who's 50, 60 years old, can get all the data you want on D&I, but that person has never walked in my shoes as a person of color. So getting that perspective, and I think that's the value there, it's perspective is going to be very important for all and any organization.
And how do we get that perspective, right? It's by starting those conversations. When the George Floyd murder happened in June, there were a lot of people and companies that started internal conversations around race. And there were also some companies who were hesitant to navigate that landscape, right? But I think it's when you start initiating those types of conversations, they don't need to be very formal. They could just be lunch and learn sessions or roundtable discussions, and just hearing and listening to those stories. I think it's very eye-opening, and it creates certain realizations as well as connections and bonds among your employees that may not have occurred if you did not allow for that conversation to happen. Because how would they know that it's how they feel if you don't express that? And over time, I'm saying that even if you open up those types of conversations, it will take time before people become really open and become really comfortable talking about it, or even volunteering to speak at those conversations. But you gotta start somewhere and start sponsoring those types of conversations in your organization.
And definitely being open. And I can think about conversations that I've had with some of my colleagues about when I realized that I think I've said this once on one of these on these webinars before, I realized walking through a store that I was like, physically, I walked into a Walgreens, and some of the Walgreens have the mirrors at the top, like the security mirrors. And this one that I was in, I noticed that I was like walking, like with my body like really open, like when my arms were like out like this. And I remember when I got out of the car, I zipped up everything, I zipped my purse. And when I got in the store, I looked up at the mirror and I noticed that I was just walking with my body very open. And I'm like, why am I walking like that? Because it looked weird. And then it dawned on me, oh, I'm trying to make sure they know I'm not stealing. And it was unconscious. And I do it every time I go in the store. I do it. I had to make myself not do it. And I had said this in a meeting, and one of my white colleagues kind of looked at me like, kind of stared. And I'm like, why are you staring at me? He said, I have never done that before. It has never occurred to me when I go in the store that somebody thinks I'm stealing. And I thought I never went in the store and thought somebody didn't think I was stealing. I mean, it just opened up this dialogue of like, wow, your experience in this world is so different. And he would have never known that if I hadn't shared it. And I would have never known. I mean, I guess I thought all people did that until he said like, no, all people don't do that. And it was a small moment, but it opened up a lot of dialogue for the whole room. And I think that increased perspective. It's so important to get these conversations going. Somebody said they do the same thing. Yeah, I mean, it's unconscious, totally unconscious. Marjorie, are you still there?
Still here.
Okay, what do you have for us?
Okay, so at a time like this, so many people have lost their jobs, but we all know a lot of new businesses start up. People are sitting at home. It's okay, well, maybe I'll start my own business. So this particular question is, how do minority women go about expanding or going into business in a state which is so segregated? And I'd just like to expand that to just any. And how can we support them? Where can they find support? And how do we encouraging these people to go find their dream?
So Gus and Marquela, you are both entrepreneurs on this call. Any advice that you would give for people of color who are starting businesses and maybe worried about their networks not being as diverse?
Yeah, I mean, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I think for me, there's power in your network and relationships. So when I was starting my consulting company, that was the first thing I did. I reached out to my Rolodex and people who I've worked with, who know me, and just asked their opinion. Like, hey, what are the hurdles and what are the challenges in this industry, but not also in the industry, but also in Milwaukee as well. So I think relationships is always a key thing. Equally too, I like to think of the glass half full and not half empty. It's almost like when you're in high school and you're a person of color, right? And you're like, gosh, I can't afford college. There's always going to be resources and money available for people of color. So I thought about the same thing too. Like it's out there, the resources are there. More people want to see you succeed than fail. So it's about staying positive, and relationships would be my two advices on that.
Yes, I agree with everything like I said. Along with that, I just, listed some general resources like WIBIC, African American Chamber of Commerce, the Hmong Chamber of Commerce, just connecting with them. There are a lot of resources, a lot of things that can be learned from home. And then as Gus was saying, letting your network know what you're doing, what you're trying to do, and bouncing that idea off of them, and making sure there's a place, there's a market for it here in Milwaukee, and how your market can support it intentionally. I feel like I was missing one more resource I wanted to name.
That was one of the questions. It was asking, what kind of resources does the African American Chamber of Commerce provide?
I can't speak for them completely. I'll drop their link in there, but I know that they have a few small business programs. I know that they've assisted with a few different grants during COVID-19, and they're always having training and workshops and different things of that nature just to help build the capacity of small businesses. And I would say the same in general for other chambers of commerce as well.
We'll drop some links too in the follow-up email so folks can reach out and connect. Marjorie, how about one more?
Have you noticed particular industries or career fields that have been successful at retaining diverse talent? And what have they done differently to be successful? Or anything different from what we've kind of already talked about here?
I would have to say in the tech industry, which is pretty much where I've been, because it's such a specialized skill and niche in a lot of ways, especially among minorities. We have a very small population of minorities that work in tech, specifically software developers or anything above management, right? I mean, like business management. And I would say that is a solid field to work in. And so I think it's almost by default because those professionals are so much in demand, and they have a lot of options, and it's really competitive. So I think that's a huge thing to consider too, as to maybe some of the diversity issues in Milwaukee is because of the competition. But I see a lot of success there. I see, a lot of elevation in the living, cost of living, not cost of living, but quality of life by being in that profession. So people tend to stay in that. I think that answers the question.
Yes. Any other thoughts? Roselle, what have you seen? Who's leading the charge in the diversity work as far as you can see?
I look at it more as companies
Yeah.
over industries. There are certain companies that do a really fine job at recruiting diverse candidates, and Microsoft is one of them. Their autism spectrum initiative is top notch. And I encourage everybody to look up Microsoft's autism initiative because it's very successful. It's something that needs to be modeled by other companies in different industries. I think it's those companies that really look at diversity in a comprehensive manner beyond recruiting and focus on belonging, creating inclusion, as well as focus on what is happening in their selection process. Those are the ones that tend to succeed because then they're not trying to spin their wheels and then having a revolving back door that just and then they're losing their diverse talent. So those are the companies that I see are doing a really good job, but also those who are going outside and expanding their recruitment area. So if there are not a lot of African Americans, let's say in your city, then expand your recruitment area and then work with community organizations, work with your historically Black colleges and universities, and reach out and expand your recruitment area beyond your local community and solicit the help of those organizations in creating a pipeline of diverse talent.
That's great. Well, I want to thank all of you, Roselle, Marquela, Gus, and Yashika. Thank you so much for being a part of this meaningful discussion in the chat. I think people are really getting a lot out of it. Before, I have a little 4-minute video that I show at the very end. So you guys can hop off, but I'll show the video to give people in the chat an opportunity to drop you all love notes, which I will email to you later. And any links and resources that folks want to drop in the chat, now is the time to do that. Before I show that little video and give people a chance to drop love notes, I just want to say shout out to Microsoft and Microsoft Teams, which we do use for work. So Yashika was like,
Points back. You get your points back. I took a couple, but you get it back.
I love it. I really do. We definitely Xbox, all that.
I have a PS4, but don't tell nobody.
No. Okay, well, it's all a community. We're all in this together. Grow the economy. Thank you all again. And I want to thank all the participants. This was really great. This was a really good conversation. I learned a lot. I think we got a lot of information out there. We could not have had this conversation without all of your expertise and the knowledge that you all have and hold. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having us.
I'm going to let you guys get back to the rest of your day. Now, the participants, hey, drop love notes in the chat. Let people on the panel know that you enjoyed their contributions. And, I always like to show a little video, right? I've shown this one before, but it's so good, I have to do it again. Let me reshare, because sometimes I forget to turn the sound on. I just want to make sure that it's on here. And it is. I love this video. So as you're watching this and enjoy it, drop the love notes and hop off if you need to. Thanks again to all the panelists, and we'll see you next week, Thursday. Check out the Fuel Milwaukee website for upcoming Race Bridge conversations and to check out our membership benefits. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not crying, you're crying. I love that. Okay, we got the love notes. I'll make sure I share them with the panelists. Thank you all. Yeah, Faith, I'll drop a link for the video and the follow-up email. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
You guys were great. Faith, if you're still there, then the link is right there. Got it? Bye.